Well, good afternoon, everybody, and I'm going to call this meeting to order, and welcome to yet another round of budget hearings, Tuesday, August 15th at the Carnegie Town Hall. And our first order of business is approval of the minutes. Would anybody like to make a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, been moved by Councilor Erickson and seconded by Councilor Rolfing. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, minutes are approved. All right, first up with our budget hearings, Chief of Police, Mr. Matt Burns, will be reporting on the police department.
Thank you, Councilor.
You're welcome.
Appreciate the invitation to speak to you today and talk about our 2018 budget. One thing that I was advised is that there was a decision to maybe have them be a little bit more brief, so I'll respectfully agree to that. One of the things that I want to do first of all is just give a big thank you to the finance team, to Tracy and Ann Bowden and Tom and Krista for helping us put together this budget. I may be up here giving the X's and O's and talking about it, but they were really the ones in the background that made this happen, so thanks to them. As we look to our 2018 numbers, really we're talking about a pretty austere budget. You'll see a continuing theme of, as we discuss this here over the next few minutes, but for what we're contractually obligated to do as far as personnel costs and some FTEs we're requesting, overall it's very flat, but it does meet our needs, and I think you'll see that. So in projecting to 2018, it is a $37.4 million budget, and referenced on page 25 of your budget book. And if approved, we would be looking at right at 300 personnel total in the police department. That does include facilities management staff. Of those would be 260 sworn officers, up from our current budget authority of 256 officers. And so some of our goals inside that budget for 2018 would be to project a 9-minute and 15-second response time for our priority calls. That would be in line with our actuals we noted in 2015, which were 8.9 minutes in 2015 and 8.82 in 2016. That did uptick a little bit because of some recent call exposure we've seen over the past year, but I would note to you that since January 1st of this year, we have actually seen a reduction in 20 seconds in response time from the police department, and that's on our piece. Because if you break this down from the time that Metro gets that call until they actually dispatch an officer, it is that time in between which we have the most control over, or if you liken it to a relay race from the time we get the baton until we take that. So a lot of the reasons for that is since the beginning of the year, we have seen 11 officers come out of training and actually hit the streets as full-fledged police officers. And as we have seen those officers be added to patrol staff, we've seen our response times comes down, as you would expect. So we're very thrilled to see that. So while we see a 9-minute, 15-second projection, we're actually optimistic it'll be below that. The next projection we see is we want to attain a goal of 38 Part 1 crimes per 1,000 population. Our exposure, actual experience in 2015 was just under 40 Part 1 crimes, and in 2016 was, again, just under 40 Part 1 crimes. We think that's a very realistic goal. Moving on, 8.75 injury accidents per 1,000 population, which would project our call experience or injury accidents in the past. And maintain a 72% clearance rate on our Part 1 violent crimes. And for our animal control team, we're looking at, again, issuing about 6,000 animal licenses, cats and dogs throughout the city. The biggest driver of our experience and the need for further help at the police department continues to be our calls for service. You'll note the last line there says in 2016 we experienced 103,698 calls for service, and that was a record for us, building upon over 2015 a 7.8% increase. This chart we think illustrates that pretty realistically. If you see the dark blue line at the top was 2016. And the only data point that was below that of 2015 was March, and that was by 13 calls. So far in 2017, our call experience has been a record for every month. Typically, hopefully, through August, we'll see a decrease in calls for service, as has been historically the case. But with a city that's a growing population, we continue to grow geographically to over almost 78 square miles, over 1,800 lane miles. streets in our city. We continue to grow, and our calls for service from the citizens certainly reflects that. So if we break it down by program, the increases you're going to see basically are the uniform services, the first one listed there, and that is a rounded number, but it's just below 400,000. That reflects basically the FTEs that we're adding. The investigation side, you'll see that that's rounded about 500,000. As we grow as a city and our calls increase, we've had to add to our investigative section. That's also known as the Detective Bureau, because last year they had a record number of just under 20,000 cases that they investigated. So in order to, when you grow everywhere, you have to give some more FTEs to your investigative side too. So we added to our narcotics section. We added an FTE to our crimes against persons, as well as our property crimes is our three main subunits of our Detective Bureau, and that reflects that. The crime lab will remain even for 2018, as will records. Animal control has a slight uptick as we project being able to transfer one of our FTEs from records into animal control due to a change in job functions. And as you can see, the only other one that increased was Metro Communications, and that was via the board-approved 4% increase, which increased what we needed to give to Metro Communications, for a total of $1.1 million. Further breakout by category, you can see that the overall increase is $1.1 million. Personnel was $1.5 million. The main, again, contributors to that would be the 4 new FTEs that we're requesting and the contractually obligated benefit increases. Some things that we're taking away from our overall total was, as you're probably aware, the contract for our security at the airport will be going to the Minnehaha County Sheriff's Department as of October 1st. And also we had a nearly $200,000 reduction in the grant from the Office of Highway Safety that we typically would receive for this year. So on balance, it's $1.11 million. Other reductions in operating costs were just in cyclical equipment purchases. Those were the most significant items. Purchases we needed to make in past years were made, and therefore we did not need to make them this year. The biggest one would be tasers and some protective equipment. And on the capital side, most of these are just cyclical purchases. We're purchasing, I think it's 14 patrol vehicles to replace ones that have been life cycled out. 3 animal control vehicles, again, to replace ones that have been in service. The radios you see there, that's a significant piece of our capital budget. These are mobile radios, but also we're going to start transitioning and replace some of the car radios. The reason we're doing this, you may have heard some of this across the state, is there's a state standard for radios that's called P25 that we're trying to meet that time frame, and we will do so in the Sioux Falls Police Department. There's a lot of trepidation across the state for many departments that are being really pushed by that, but we are well positioned to be in place to meet that time frame through the support of the administration and this council in past years. The in-car camera system you see there, that's a cyclical purchase to replace. That's about a $700,000 piece in our capital budget to replace on a life cycle basis the entire in-car camera system for our patrol vehicles. You'll see one more K9, that's an addition to our K9 unit. And then the next item, servers and video storage. You'll see that goes up and down in our capital budget, and this year I think it's at around $100,000 for servers and video storage. So again, it's about $2 million. Those are the main items that make up the capital budget. So I promise you it wouldn't be too detailed, but I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. I know that there will be, and at this time I'd be happy to entertain those.
Thank you very much, Chief. Any questions for the Chief at this point in time? Councilor Selber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What are the guidelines for replacing vehicles? I mean, is there a certain mileage? Is there an age of a car? Is there a combination of all the above type of thing? Or
typically it's about 100,000 miles once they get 100,000 on a vehicle, and that's typically done between 2.5 to 3 years. It doesn't take us very long to get that many miles on a vehicle.
Right. Okay. That's all I had. Thanks.
Okay. Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I have 2 different questions, if I can. In regards to the P25 radios, is there any state support with that? Or is it strictly our responsibility as a city to have the most up-to-date radios as we move forward to try to have those updates.
Yeah, the state has made it very clear that they are responsible for the infrastructure piece, so the towers, the background equipment, things like that. But when it comes to the individual radios for the officers, the mobiles, and for the in the cars, that is the responsibility of the law enforcement or public safety entity.
Okay. And as we move forward to that, I mean, some of this other municipalities are going to have some issues with getting those new radios, and so I'm hoping that we're not just chucking them out because they're using the parts for a break fix to where they'll take our pieces and fix somebody in another town that maybe can't quite afford to get those new radios yet. And I know they've had to go on different crazy websites to find some of the pieces to fix them as well. So it's just kind of interesting that we're almost to that break fix point in some other towns. So I commend you for being proactive and making sure that we're up to date on that. My other question, if I can have one follow-up, Mr. Chair. Last year we did the study. That's kind of a question, but not really. I'll just keep going. We did the study in regards to really public safety as a whole and our facilities. Where are we with that? Did we pause? Is that completed? I should know, and I don't. I know it was fire, police, all of that, that we're going to study all of the facilities at one point last year.
Right, that is ongoing. The police department had a small piece in that. We contracted with a local architectural firm to do a space needs analysis on our building. If you recall, we moved into the current law enforcement center in 2003. We're not able to go up with that building at all because of the limits of the building, the way it was made at the time. And so because of the growth in our department and projected growth, we're just doing a space needs analysis that will cover locker rooms, workspaces, parking, and a number of things to make sure that we have the room we need.
And so is the police department on the same task force with the jail? There's the jail as they're moving the new jail forward. Is that something that your team has been a part of? Because if there's a space needs and they're building a new building, why not just go ahead and share some of that since it's in the same wheelhouse?
Primarily the piece that we've been involved with the jail side has been the parking piece, because as you can expect, when they take out a great number of parking spaces to build the new jail, it's going to really make it much more tighter than what it is now, and that's not a good prospect as it's tight now. But we do communicate with the jail and the sheriff's department on that. They were, as was the DCI who has space in our building, part of our space needs analysis as far as the survey and about what they would anticipate their future needs or intent for space is going to be.
When does that plan to wrap up?
Well, I would anticipate that report coming back from the contracted firm in the next couple months for our piece.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you. Thanks.
Councilor Rolfing.
Thank you, Chief Burns. Couple of questions I had as I went through here. First, patrol vehicles. I look on page 189 of the capital improvement budget on equipment, and I see a lot of replace vehicles coming out. Those are being done through fleet. The money should be there for those, correct?
You mean the ones we're replacing?
Yeah.
Yeah, the ones we replace get surplus through fleet.
But the money that you pay every month, basically, out of your budget, like other departments, don't you do that the same way, so that if you have a car and then we buy it the first time with cash, and then you start putting basically a lease so that when you need to replace that, the money's there for it, correct?
Yeah, we don't do it the same way as the other departments. We purchase ours through our own capital plan and then life cycle those out, but the surplus piece goes through. That's
the difference here. I saw a lot of replace here, and I'm thinking, do they really need to be in a budget then, because the money's there for them? So that answers that question. The OHS grant reduction, what is going to be taken away because of that, or?
Basically, that funded overtime monies for saturation patrols that we do all throughout the year. We're just going to be doing less of those because we won't have the federal grant funds to make that happen.
Okay. And if I may, I did have one more back here. I thought I did. I guess I did not. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Councilor Staley.
A few questions, Chief Burns. The KD dog, would you explain again what is that?
The canine dog?
Yeah.
That would be in addition to our canine program. We currently have 4 canines that are trained to detect narcotics and our intent would be to have this canine to be an explosive detection dog, because we've not had one of those on our department as far as a department-owned canine, and we're seeing several instances where that would be not only appropriate but needed here, and it could be used on a mutual aid basis elsewhere. But that would be
What does that cost?
That we have budgeted, yes, $12,000 in the capital program.
A question, I know this came up after the collapse of the Copper Lounges, that we flew their dog in from Rapid. Have we ever thought about that or pursued that since
Not as a
have our own dog here?
Yeah, not as a police canine. That's a highly specialized and very
Right, but-
discriminately trained. But so the police dogs that we have are trained to detect now several different type of drugs through the odorant that they train on.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying, this is a separate question, but have we ever considered having one of those rescue dogs in Sioux Falls versus in Rapid?
That question has not come up as far as the police department as of yet.
Okay, so it could at some point?
Yeah.
Or, I mean, is there some reason that Rapid has been designated as the place where that dog's located?
I'm not the best person to speak to about this, because this is more of a search and rescue type function. We have a canines with a separate function, but I suspect that Chief Goodroad might be able to offer some more on that.
Okay, great. And then, have we ever looked at buying body cams for these police officers, or where are we at? Do we have some? Or?
Right, we're in the testing mode for body cams. Currently we have officers on our department that ride motorcycles and that ride bicycles, and that's a successful program for us as well, that do not have a recording system to record interactions with the public like all our officers do who drive the cars and the patrol vehicles. So we've been testing a few of those platforms. We began testing actually in late 2015, and we're looking to purchase cameras in 2016 for those officers on bikes and motorcycles, but we did not find an acceptable vendor that was compatible with the system that we have currently. The current system we have is a Panasonic vendor, and the product that they had to offer was frankly, it was just not up to par to be purchased. So as we look to 2018 and we see we have a $700,000 for our in-car systems, we thought it was best to hold off just a little bit, and we're confident with IT support to be able to purchase those cameras that we need for those officers where we have a gap with those same number of monies in the capital piece, and that way we ensure, because it'll be done through an RFP process, that it's all compatible, so that all the video that we get will be able to go into the same software management system and be viewed and be compatible, and it's just much, much better when you're talking about a lot of video.
So, okay, so if the public says, where are we at with these body cams, we say Panasonic was not compatible with, our system wasn't compatible with the RFPs, right?
Well, I would answer it this way. We've been testing body cameras for our motorcycle and bike officers, because they don't have any system now, and that's my priority, to fill that gap where we don't have anything, because every officer that drives a patrol car has a recording system. Mm-hmm. That goes back to a static camera that's on their dash, but they still have the ability to record audio. So they have the capability to record the audio of those interactions. Okay, the body cameras would be primarily given to those officers who have nothing.
Right, but so what would be the end date that we'd say we're going to have these fitted to our officers? Are we looking 2019? It's going to happen in 2018?
The motorcycle and bicycle officers, through that RFP, we would be looking to have them outfitted in 2018 if we can find a product that's acceptable to us.
And if we can't?
Then we'll continue looking and testing.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Councilor Neitzer.
Thanks. I actually have a couple questions, but I'll first take a stab at the rescue dog thing. I think there was either an emergency management or a fire rescue individual. I may be looking at one of them. I think they answered this question shortly after the building collapsed, and I think it had to do with proficiency. I think a dog needs to do this a lot, and out in Rapid City with all of the terrain, they do that more. And I think they had said having one here was, if you only do it once a year, then they're not going to be terribly proficient. So I think it was a proficiency thing. I don't think it was designated that Rapid City was going to be the rescue dog city. It just so happens they have more use for one. So anyway, the shooting range, there was going to be a baffle system upgrade, I think, for safety. Was that pushed back, it looks like?
The range baffle system, the overhead piece was. Now, what we did last year is we actually redid the bullet trap, and that's been all put in place, and then we're just getting ready to open the gate again, if you will, on our outdoor range and start that for full use, and that was put in, and it looks great.
So it hasn't been in use for a while? Have they just been shooting down at the law enforcement center?
Right.
Okay, but what is the baffle system? What part is that going to address?
That would actually be overhead, so it still lets in light because they're at an angle, but it gives you some ballistic protection going out. And what we've done, we've really changed some of the training that we did when we first started using that range, so we've really mitigated the exercises and the techniques that may put a errant round, if you will, on a trajectory that would leave the range. And so it's not nearly as critical a need as it was in the past because of the mitigation strategies we've put in place, but long term it's still something that would probably be advisable to put on.
All right, so right now you're very confident in the safety with or without this baffle system?
Much more so than in the past, yes.
Okay. And then as far as the, back to the camera system, are you going to be, is the pilot or the testing you're going to be doing, would there be a decision at some point whether or not to go with body cameras for all officers?
We will look at that, but just for everyone's background information, that's a bigger leap because there's a lot more stakeholders than just the police department. When you add an entirely new video stream, and that's what it is, it's an entirely independent video stream from what we have now, you increase your storage that you need tremendously. And all these cameras now are at a pretty high resolution, and so they record, and the video piece is a lot bigger than it would have been, say, just 4 or 5 years ago. So we have other stakeholders we have to consult with then. The state's attorney's office is the ultimate consumer of our video product, and so they have to get that, they have to manage that, they have to redact that to a judge's order, and so we want to make sure that they're on board with all that too, and we've been in discussions about this. Because it's a big ask for another stakeholder. That's not the sole thing that you decide on or look at when you make the decision to go to body cams, but it is a significant one.
Okay, and that leads right into my other question that had to do with, and it has to do with both, also with in your cars. I believe, so when do they get turned on when the static cameras? Is it when they turn on the sirens or they exit the vehicle? Is it a manual process?
No, it turns on automatically when they turn on the lights and the siren. That's automatically. They can turn it on manually, but we have a whole policy addresses when they're supposed to turn on their cameras.
And getting to storage, the retention, how long, I mean, obviously there could be cases where there's a subpoena where somebody wants to see the footage, but a lot of it is going to be, frankly, nobody cares. I mean, do you have to hold on to this for everything for so long that isn't every officer's car and then you discard, or?
Right. We have specific retention periods that are assigned to every piece of video, depending on whether it's just a case report, whether an arrest was made, whether we know that case is going to be significant, like a capital case. We have specific retention periods. You don't assign everything the same because that would be an irresponsible use of your, crucial video storage space, but we have that all lined out in policy.
Sure, yeah, you'd have rooms full of, disk arrays and things like that. So that's the big consideration, is if you start going, the more you add like body cameras and all this other, you're going to have tons of storage that you have to maintain. And do you maintain that, or do you have is that sitting somewhere else, or?
It depends on the kind of system that you have. Currently, our system it's on local servers. Okay, from our in-car video and from our detective bureau interview rooms. But if you go to a different kind of system with body cams, there's different options. You can go full server, you can go storage on the cloud, or you can go to a hybrid system that has some of both. And we expect to see those as we do an RFP process on what's out there.
Various proposals.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things, kind of the wonky part first. Explain to me again, Chief, you were talking about, as we get closer to full strength or full force, there's a significant decrease in your part-time employees. Was that part of the grant process that the Office of Highway Safety decrease, or are we back to having enough full-time officers? I'm looking at on page 27 of the budget book. It shows about a 46.4% decrease in part-time
Those are the airport officers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's why that one stood out. And then, obviously, the use of overtime will decrease as we get closer to full force and training, so that'll be a significant savings. And then the other one that just kind of stood out to me on the same thing was the amount for workers' compensation is almost a 60% increase. And we've seen that in some of the other budgets, but I would assume with your employees that is work comp is a big part of the job, unfortunately, that people become injured and...
It is, but that number is not truly reflective of our workers' comp experience. Part of that number is a significant piece of that number is basically a true up for all the departments. So recently, RAS did an analysis, and they utilized their data and a new matrix, and so they're assigning values and kind of truing it up to try to get a baseline for all departments. So that's, again, not exactly reflective of our experience, but they're establishing a baseline. And so ours went up that amount, and I suspect fires went up a similar amount.
Somebody's budget wants it back from last year then, as we true up. So you've done okay on that part of it. To shift gears a little bit, can you talk about your new diversity officer and plans as we try to, all through the city, to try to diversify and make our employee base look more like our community? And so I know you've had some big news, and it'd be nice to share a little bit about that and kind of how we're moving forward in attracting officers, because it becomes more difficult each year. I would think that we continue to hear that in the workforce all the way around, and even more so probably with your department.
Yes, thank you. Our diversity officer, or community resource officer, is the moniker we've given. It actually started officially yesterday on Monday. And Cynthia Holmquist is the officer that's assigned to that role. And she was taken around by a couple of the officers that have been doing that as an additional duty to some of our local stakeholders and like the Lutheran Social Services and the Multicultural Center to kind of get her acclimated and up to speed and to begin to make some of those connections and relationships that she's going to need. This is a position that we wanted to do for a few years now. Our city is getting to the size, our department's getting to the size where it truly makes sense to have one person as your focal point on these relationships with some of the minority communities, the ethnic communities, the LGBTQ communities, and things like this. It just makes sense given our size, and we want to give that its appropriate due. We also hope and expect that those further relationships will help in our recruiting in some of our minority communities. That would seem to be a natural outgrowth of that, and as you build relationships and rapport and demystify what you do and who you are, we hope to see additional rewards in recruiting. I would offer since you did bring it up, currently our entire sworn officer diversity numbers are 10.3% of our sworn officers self-identify as either a race other than white or two races. So we feel pretty good about that number, and we have 53 females in our department, and the whole department sworn and civilian, and 231 males. So we have been working to try to increase the diversity in our department. It is a goal stated by me and others prior to me that we want to reflect our community. And so we're working towards that goal. And I guess the last piece on this, just on July 31st, we started a brand new police class of 12 officers, again, working to get up to our authorized strength number. Half of that class, or 6 officers, self-identified as either a race other than Caucasian or two races. And so, again, those recruiting efforts, those efforts that we've been putting forth, getting out there, working our community, we feel like are paying off.
If I may, I want to say thank you for the effort. I think it's a big part. I think our community appreciates that, and lowering those barriers so that, when you look nationally, and some of the things that we've seen in the news as part of that is because forces don't become diversified and don't look like their community. And I think that goes a long ways towards providing a safe community for our Sioux Falls. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Chief, you stated, I believe you stated it's a 10-month training period for new officers, or what is the period?
It's from the date that an officer gets hired till the date that they're potentially out on their own. If all their training goes in order and with no extensions, it's 8 months. 8-month training period. Now we have a 15-month probation period for them, but that's an administrative function. But it is 8 months.
It's one thing staying ahead of additional FTEs because you can generally plan for that, but what is the notice period that we ask officers to provide that are planning on retiring? How soon in advance do they generally announce? Do we have a policy so that we can plan accordingly as well, too, for training needs?
Yes, we generally will get a list from HR of the updated list of who's all available, and we typically will be asking at least a year out so we can plan, because there's those payouts in the budget as noted, as you'll see here, as far as the benefit payouts that we do need to budget for. And also, not only that piece, but then our recruiting piece to fill that in. So we are asking at least a year out.
Absolutely, because as you just stated, it's 8 months for training, but you do have to recruit prior to that as well. And then just one other comment from me. You'd mentioned with the police calls for service that we're seeing an increase in population, obviously, and we're seeing an increase in calls. Would you say that that increase in calls for service is matching our increase in population? Is it slightly above, slightly below?
It's tracking very closely.
Very closely.
It's not a mirror image, it's not a direct transit of property, but it does track very closely. And it tracks closely with our MSA, our statistical area, which is probably north of 260,000. And as we know, all those folks, or a good number of them, are working and recreating and seeking medical care and shopping in Sioux Falls as well. So that is a big contributor to our calls for service as well.
Okay, and then the other thing that you mentioned that really resonated with me is the geographic growth as well, too. As we're increasing in population, we're also increasing in miles, square miles, that our officers, our public safety servants have to cover. So realizing a decrease, a 20-second decrease in the response time, despite the fact that we're also increasing in population and we're increasing geographically as well, too. That's very positive, and I commend you on that as well, too.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more questions, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Chief Burns. We appreciate the information. Next up to report on fire, we have Fire Chief Brad Goodroad.
Good afternoon, Council. Appreciate the opportunity to come in and present today. I'd also like to thank our financial analyst, Krista Stussy, and the finance team, and my fire team for helping create the budget proposal and this presentation. So Fire Rescue's proposed 2018 budget is $29.2 million, of which $27.1 million is operating expenditures and $2.1 million is for capital expenditures. So with these funds, Fire Rescue is able to accomplish the following for our community. We have a goal to maintain our insurance, our ISO rating of 1, which we achieved in 2016. The rating scale is from 1 to 10, with 1 being the best or the highest. This rating evaluates community risk and the department's ability to respond and react to those risks, and has the potential to lower insurance rates for homeowners as well as businesses. We have a goal to maintain our status as an accredited fire department. We are currently one of only 56 departments in the nation that are both accredited and have an ISO rating of 1. The accreditation looks at all aspects of our service delivery, including response times, deployment strategies, training, community risk, the water supply infrastructure, and industry best practices. We collaborate closely with Public Works, GIS, and Metro Communication to complete this comprehensive self-assessment, which is a true third-party evaluation of our service delivery. We operate 11 fire stations that are staffed 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, with a total of 208 personnel, with 195 of those being uniformed. We conduct over 7,500 building inspections to ensure all buildings meet fire code, and every commercial structure is inspected each year. We have a goal to respond to 90% of our emergency calls within 8 minutes and 21 seconds, which includes dispatch time, as well as our goal for turnout time of 1 minute and 30 seconds, and our travel time goal of 5 minutes and 12 seconds. In 2016, we responded to 90% of our emergency calls in 8 minutes, 32 seconds or less, and our turnout time was 1 minute and 6 seconds, with our travel time being 5 minutes and 11 seconds. We have a goal to keep property loss from fire below our national average of $4.4 million annually. Fire loss currently through July of 2017 is $2.5 million. And our fire loss in 2016 was $4.4 million, and in 2015 was $5 million. We have a goal to save 98% of our property that is exposed to fire. So through July of 2017, we've saved $134 million of property. In 2016, we were able to save $137 million in property. And I think what's more impressive, over the last 5 years, nearly $1 billion of property has been exposed to fire, and 98% of that property, or $193 million, was saved by having the fire department in place. Looking at our CARES data, measures outcomes of witnessed cardiac arrest. The national average rate of survival is 35%, and in 2016, our survival rate in our community was 55%. In 2016, fire rescue responded to a total of 12,932 calls for service. This is up 5% from 2015 calls for service. And over the past 5 years, we've averaged about 5% each year. Some fire services, in addition to firefighting, EMS. In 2016, we responded to 6,821 emergency medical calls. Wildland, in 2016, we had resources deployed to 8 large wildland fires across the state and region. Hazardous materials, in 2016, we responded to 749 hazardous materials calls. Urban search and rescue, which includes water rescue, rope and high angle, trench, confined space, and structural collapse. In 2016, we responded to 2 building collapses within the city of Sioux Falls. On August 1st, we had Madison Street in Ebenezer was a construction site with a tilt-up construction. Successfully rescued trapped worker out of that. December 2nd, 136 South Phillips Avenue, brick and mortar building collapsed, trapping 2 people. We successfully rescued 1 occupant and recovered the other victim that had already passed from their injuries. Our car safety seat program, providing checks for proper installation and provide seats to those proving financial need. In 2016, we installed more than 750 car seats, and then we checked another over 1,000 seats for proper installation. CPR training. In 2016, we provided CPR training to 5,300 residents. In our fire training center, we delivered a cadet academy each year. We deliver multi-company drills, in-station training to all members. We conduct certification classes and provide regional training grounds for several agencies. Our fire prevention. In 2016, fire prevention conducted 7,500 building inspections, of which 1,800 were for new construction. Fire prevention investigates every fire to determine fire and cause, or fire origin and cause. We educated 10,650 students about fire prevention and safety in our school system, and reviewed 400 construction plans, and distributed over 1,000 smoke alarms to those in need. Our emergency preparedness. City maintains an emergency operations center at the Law Enforcement Center and a multi-agency coordination team to coordinate these large-scale multi-agency natural disasters. Emergency management conducts planning, coordination with numerous agencies through the city, county, state, and federal level. They guide large-scale emergency response and recovery operations throughout our community. We support special event organizers with severe weather, security, and EMS planning, and then when hosting events in the city parks and downtown. Emergency management works with several response agencies to develop and conduct disaster exercises and drills each year, and the city maintains a system of 77 outdoor warning sirens. Fire Rescue's operating budget is comprised of 4 programs. The Fire Service Program, which includes all of our fire, EMS, wildland, hazmat, rescue, and training expenditures. This is increasing just over 3%, or $800,000, due largely to wage and benefit increases. All other programs are flat from 2017 to 2018. Looking at Fire Rescue's budget by category, personnel expenditures are up $700,000 for wages and benefit increases. Other operating expenditures are up just over $100,000 to purchase physical training equipment and resiliency training. Both of those we anticipate receiving grant funds for in 2018. Fire Rescue's capital budget in 2018 is $2.1 million. There are no capital projects budgeted for 2018. We will be replacing a number of pieces of equipment, including a heavy rescue fire truck for approximately $700,000, a wildland truck for $200,000, rescue equipment including airbags, hydraulic equipment, and shoring kits for We will also purchase 50 new CPR devices for $170,000, which anticipate to receive grant funds for 85% of that. Those CPR devices are a Lucas automatic compression device, which automatically provides perfect manual compressions during CPR, which alleviates that interruption in care when you're switching out personnel. Excuse me. So that concludes presentation from Sioux Falls Fire Rescue for the budget. I welcome any questions.
Chief Goodroad, thank you very much. Questions for the chief? Councilor Eric or Staley.
Hi, Chief. Councilor Neitzer was indicating that Rapid has more need for that canine or the search and rescue dog than we do. Is that, do they have more catastrophes out there? Or?
No, I think the way I understand that is it's a very expensive resource to have. So what that canine is it's part of the state resource. So it's part of our state USAR deployment team. So it can be utilized anywhere within the state. It just happens to be in Rapid City with the trainer that's there. So the way I understand it, yeah, it's just a very expensive asset to have and to maintain and to train. And when you look at the value of it and what we have, a lot of things we have, they could do as well of a job or better. Like our DELSAR system is a micro camera that goes through all the voids and do that type of thing. And we train to find those type of things that way. But we can utilize that resource and call for it if we need it.
So the dog, you're saying the dog is paid for by the state?
It's a state resource, so I don't know exactly who pays for it or how it is, but it's part of the state resource. In other words, like we have things, and we have part of that state USAR task force that I think we received some grant funding from the state, and then some of it's our own.
So like when the dog came, who did we make? I'm assuming we paid somebody something. Did we make that payment to Rapid City?
No, but it's treated more like a mutual aid. So it's part of that resource. So when that comes in, then we are able to utilize that resource. That's the way I understand it.
So okay. So Rapid doesn't have more catastrophes, or I mean, where is the dog? It has to be continually trained. Where does it get its training? Do you know?
Right. There's several certifications that it has. We really looked at that after the collapse and evaluated this. There's training all over the country that the dog goes to, so it's very specialized training. So it's not something that just any dog can come in and within a couple weeks you've got a dog trained to do this. It's highly specialized training that is very expensive. So they're traveling to go to a certain place for a month to spend and train with that dog. It takes a lot of resource money-wise, and then you've got a person that basically has to have that dog, and that's their only job is to have that dog.
Okay. So getting down to the expense part, we don't really know then who's bearing the brunt of the expense for this dog, because you're not sure if it's Rapid City or if it's the state.
Right, I'm not.
It's not Sioux Falls,
myself,
though.
Right.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilor Erickson, you.
Yep, thank you. Couple of questions that I have in regards to the study, if there's an update or anything that you can share with the study that you guys were a part of. I know that Chief Burns talked about it a little bit, and so it's going to be done in a couple months. But I'm curious if you can give any information about that. And then my second question is in regards to the new software that you received. Director Sue Quambeck discussed that, and so I'd just be curious about expanding on that just a little bit.
So the first one, say it again.
Space needs study.
Space needs. That has not been done yet. We have the RFP out that's been accepted. Now we've got our first kickoff meeting with them within the next month here.
Okay.
So it's a little more delayed than what we thought. I mean, we thought it was going to be middle of summer, probably before this was going. And now it looks like it's going to be within the next 2 or 3 weeks that we're going to have our kickoff meeting, and then they'll be in town and do that. So that's kind of the progress of that. I'm looking forward to that. Get some
I was under
results
this.
back from
I was under the understanding that it was all done by the same company under all the public safety departments, but that's not
that. And it is, and it will be. It's just we don't have it. It hasn't really started yet.
started for you guys. Okay, thank you. And then my other question was in regards to the new software program that you received here recently. I know Director Sue Quambeck had referred to fire to discuss it any further. So I was just curious if you could give us just a brief update on that.
Yep, I think you're talking about our Zoll fire reporting software.
Yes.
Yeah. So information comes from the CAD, from Metro Communication, and goes into the Zoll software. And what that is it's basically the entire software package for all of our records for incidents. So we have to maintain records for all fire incidents and all of our EMS incidents. So through the patient care report, you know, if there's anything that comes back on something that we have to report to on that call, litigation, and then on the fire side, you know, there's reporting to the state, federal reporting on that. So it basically is our software for everything we do, that tracks everything we do.
Wonderful, thank you, appreciate
And
that
that's
update.
it's implemented and it's underway.
Doing well,
Yep.
okay, good, thank you.
Councilor Neitzer?
Chief, looking at your capital budget, the rescue airbags, 4 of them, is that trailer with the bladder on it that in case you get run in, or is that something else?
Nope, that's something else. The airbags are a lifting system. So if you have someone that's trapped, like when I referenced that tilt-up construction collapse, those are utilized to move that large piece of prefab concrete off of the patient and then be able to remove them. That's what it's for. So we have different sets of that can hold different loads.
Okay, I'll take another stab. Hydraulic rescue equipment, is that like a Jaws of Life?
Right.
Okay. And then the CPR devices you made reference to, it's an automatic.
Yep.
It's doing the compressions versus the...
Right, it's an automatic, it's a manual compression device. So when you put it on the patient and turn it on, it does the chest compressions for you. And chest compressions are probably the major thing that saves lives in CPR. It's moving, getting the heart moving. And what that does is it allows, of course, once that's on there, that person can do other things, and then the machine doesn't tire out and it doesn't get less. So when you're doing CPR, if you're doing that for about 2 minutes, you want to switch out people so that you have it so it's effective, where this machine just does the exact same thing and just keeps doing it until you turn it off.
And so does it have a way to feel how much resistance it's getting so it doesn't go too hard on an 8-year-old versus a 70-year-old?
Yep, there's some settings, and then when you put it on, you slide it in place so that once it feels the difference from where it starts to where the chest is, that's where it starts, and then it'll start going. Yeah, and then it's designed to not, it's based on its feedback of what it's getting, by how
so
much
it's not
pressure it's giving.
busting a bunch of ribs or anything?
Yep.
So since we're on this subject, it's not really budget related. The hands-only CPR, I mean, I took CPR, a few years back when it was still, doing the whole thing. Is that considered just as effective as doing the breathing and all of that, or?
Right. I think, over time you'll see that the CPR changes based on data and studies and what they do. A number of years ago, the breathing seemed to be the more important part than the compressions, and now they're finding that getting the blood moving through the system is more important than the breaths. They're both important, but one is more important than the other, and that is the compressions. And then the hands-only CPR, they teach that as a way that if a person is scared to do anything more, then they can at least do that and be very effective.
Sure, that makes sense. And then the final question, as far as annexation goes, as we're, like on my west side of town where we're just annexing like crazy and people are building tons of houses, are you looking at it at each time to calculate to say, okay, can Fire Station 10 handle this? You must have some sort of formula to know how many rooftops that each can handle so that you can either say, well, we got to stop annexing, or it's time to do a new fire station. How does that interaction work?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things we do. We work really close with GIS. We have a tremendous GIS department in the city, and they help us with our response times based on everything from the station, and what it takes to respond. And we can see where we're meeting our response times, and we can see where we're not. And then we also have a new Code 3 software. It's a predictive analytics software that we're training on actually right now this week. And that is, we're able to input our data and see some of those results you're talking about, and then we're also able to change it. So if we want to change anything, any part of the system, we can change it. If we want to deploy from this intersection instead of this intersection, and then see what it does. So it's going to be an effective tool, I think, for our operations as well as our prevention division.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep.
Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Chief Goodroad, for the presentation. My question is similar to what I had for Chief Burns as far as vehicles, fire truck. What are the guidelines that you come across to replace those? Again, is it an age? Is it a mileage? Is it? It looks to be like when I'm looking at the budget book here, it looks like you're adding one a year for the next couple of years. Is that
right? And that's kind of what you want to try and get on as a cyclical, just replacement pattern with a lot of these things that we do. It's similar to your own vehicles. If you don't want to trade them too soon, or the value is you've lost a lot of value in depreciation and you're not getting the trade-in for what you've spent on it. If you wait too long, you're spending more on maintenance, or you cannot maintain them because they're just obsolete and they don't have the parts and all the things that you need. So there's a kind of a sweet spot in there where you're getting the full use, but you're also getting some value in trade-in. You're not spending money on repairs and replacement of items on it that you would need to. So what we try and do, the truck that's in here now for 2018, we're replacing our oldest vehicle. So we're just always taking our oldest vehicle that is usually a reserve. It's still in service, but it's a reserve apparatus. So when others are being worked on, it fills in. And it's also at the training center. We are trading those in and you can see as it moves out, we're trying to kind of keep up with that.
So for example, the one you're going to be taking out of the rotation, how old is it or how many miles or what got it in that position? Just
that
age?
one is 18 years old and it has just under 100,000 miles.
Okay.
And it has a foam system on it that is obsolete that we cannot fix. We can't find parts to fix it. That's the kind of things I'm talking about. If it starts to get a little bit too old, then you run into real problems. So there is a kind of a sweet spot, and I think we've done a really good job over the last recent years to not be reactive to this, to try and be ahead of it a little bit.
And when you look at some of these numbers, like you've got 700,000, 475,000, 985. I mean, do they vary that much with different vehicles depending on?
Yep. Yeah, there's a huge variance in what it is, what the vehicle is. The one that we have coming up here in 2018 is a heavy rescue truck. So that's a little bit more than a normal engine company would cost. A normal engine companies are about 450,000. This is going to be what a normal engine company can do, plus it's going to hold all of our USAR equipment. So now we hook up to a trailer and pull some of our gear. We're going to be able to have all of that gear on this truck and be able to deploy immediately. So that's why it's a little bit more. And then looking in the future, when we replace some of these other rescue trucks, we're going to be able to utilize more of a standard engine company. So we're going to save money in the future on some of these other trucks by having this rescue now.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Starr.
Thank you. Chief, I'm back to page 19 in the budget book for those following along, and I'm kind of seeing the opposite of what I saw with the police department. There's a significant drop in full-time expenses for full-time employees, but a rather significant, over 200% increase for overtime. So I'm assuming, and I've seen on Facebook some of your new cadet class starting, and I've, as an aside, have enjoyed that, watching them be part of that process. But are we kind of in that same place where we're relying on overtime to fill in maybe some shortages for employees? Because the other side of that too, when you go down the column, is there's a fairly significant increase for the amount of training. So I'm assuming we're bringing more people on, or let you kind of take me through that.
Yeah, there's a couple things that are happening here. This large increase you're seeing in extra duty, that's a contract change that we did during our last contract. There's a certain number of hours that firefighters work, and when they go over 53 hours a week, they're required to pay them overtime. What we were doing, or have them off. So what we were doing before is every 27 days, 12 hours for every employee needed to be scheduled off. So it was a lot of work for the battalion chiefs to schedule that. So in this contract, they're just working through that and not getting that time off, so we're paying that extra duty and gaining that efficiencies in our battalion chiefs so they aren't trying to schedule that. But on the flip side of that, the reduction that you're seeing there in full-time, we were paying for their holidays. So they had 10 holidays that we were paying for. Now they're getting that time off, so we're not paying it. So it was pretty much a wash in the contract. So we're paying more on the extra duty side or overtime side. We're paying less on the holiday side. So it was very, very compatible in dollars. And then we still gain that efficiency on our battalion chiefs for scheduling. And then the other one you mentioned farther down was
training and education.
the training, right. The increase on that is the resiliency training that we have, and part of that's going to be grant funded. So the actual dollars in there are going to stay about the same as they were in 2017, but that reflects, those grant dollars for that resiliency training.
Okay. So maybe as a follow-up, if I can, Mr. Chair, take me through the training process. How long does it take from the time we go through the whole selection process and actually have that cadet on the ground and start training till they're ready to take a shift by themselves?
Yep. You know, it starts out where they just express interest, and then that's all worked through HR. And then so they know who's interested and who to contact when the position opens. Once that position opens, they apply online. After that application period closes, then our first thing is a written test. So they come in and they'll have to pass 70% for a written test. Once they pass that, they go on to our physical agility test. That's a pass-fail. Once they pass that, then they're on an eligibility list. And then from that point, we interview, and we can interview now by banding. So if we want, we can only take maybe those that did a 90% or above on their test or an 80% above on their test. We can take that first band and interview them. And then if we have enough past that interview to fill the positions, then that's all the farther we have to go. And then once we offer them a position, they basically have a position offered contingent on passing a psychological evaluation and a doctor's physical based on an FPA standard. So once they pass those two things, then they're ready to go in the cadet class. And then the cadet class, as you mentioned, started here last week. That's a 14-week cadet class. And once they're done with that 14 weeks, then they come on the floor, and then they're on a truck.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for the chief? Chief Goodrow, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice presentation. That moves us to our next item on the agenda, and that is Planning and Building Services. And Director of Planning, Mike Cooper, will be presenting. Director Cooper, good to see you again.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. It's kind of ironic that I'm following police and fire today because as you look at the graphics that we have up on the screen, these are 3 posters that we have downstairs at City Hall across from our service counter. And we've done this to help educate the public on what we do, what's the purpose of having our department. And so in addition to police and fire, we also save lives and we also protect property as well as we grow the city. And so as we look at the 3 divisions of planning, zoning, building services, this is kind of our way of helping explain graphically, visually, some of the things that we do and some of the services that we provide to the community. So we're investing just over $6 million in 2018 to operate the Planning and Building Services Department. And I also want to say thank you to the finance team for putting together this presentation. And also to make sure that you know that Butch Warrington is in the audience today, our Chief Building Services official. So as we look at some of our goals, our targets, we want to have a current and responsive planning for a well-developed city. Those Planning Commission recommendations that you see on a monthly basis on your council agenda. The target for those is 40 days from submittal to going forward for a hearing. And we've expanded that over the years to provide more public notice with signage, with letters that go out, with notices. So I think the public notification process has really improved over the years with input from the council. The signs are bigger and those kind of things. So we're doing a much better job of that. Also, look at customer service, enhancing the customer capabilities with responsive and efficient services. So you see a picture that was just taken yesterday at our service counter, and we've changed some of our targets regarding plan approvals and permits. So now we have a 2-day period from requesting non-residential inspections. And I can talk about that a little bit more. With our InterGov system, we now have the capacity to improve the way that we do inspections. And in the past, our inspectors would take requests on a daily basis. And what we've discovered is that we spend a lot of time traveling around the city to get from one inspection to another. And so now with the new policy that we've just started implementing, that an inspection has to be requested a day ahead of time, What that means is that each inspector, whether it's plumbing or electrical or building, they can schedule those inspections the next day, and they can cluster where they're going to be going between those locations or those addresses. And so by doing that, we've already discovered that we can do more inspections per day because there's less travel time. We've had a little bit of pushback from the industries because it is a change, particularly from, let's say that we're doing a footing and foundation inspection. And so in the previous policy, they could call that morning and expect that we would have somebody come out there that same morning. But we are educating the industries to make them aware of the new policy. We do have some flexibility. If there's a weather issue or an emergency issue, we can still respond. But I think this policy is already starting to create more efficiencies for our staff. As the number of inspections goes up, we can still deal with those with the same level of staffing. The second thing is the residential building permits. We no longer do those the same day, which, again, we've done it that way for years. So why have we changed that policy? Well, first of all, those plans get more complex. We want to make sure that we're reviewing those properly, completely. And second of all, when somebody walks in and says, now I want my residential permit approved, then we have to put on hold some of the other projects that have already been in the queue for some time. So this is working out pretty well so far. And I don't know if you've heard of any complaints or pushback from anybody, but we believe that this is still providing a good customer service. We wanted to put some stats in here from last year, again, to help the council, the public understand what we do and the variety of services that we provide. So last year we issued over almost 7,400 building permits, and we completed over 58,000 different types of inspections. Those building permits can fluctuate from year to year, and for those of you that have been on the council for a while, if you remember, after the 2013 ice storm, we had about 2 or 3 years of roofing permits that kind of drove us all a little bit bonkers. And now that we've caught up with those, you'll see that those permit numbers from 2013, 2014, even 15 have dropped off. A lot of that was because of roofing or reshingling permits. But you can see the different types of inspections: building, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, zoning. Over almost 61,000 phone calls taken last year for a variety of purposes, but primarily to schedule inspections. And with EnerGov, as we move forward with that online permitting and online inspection request, those phone calls we hope will stabilize or even drop off eventually. Subdivision plats, rezonings, which all come to you as the council, conditional use permits you don't typically see unless they're appealed. It's also interesting to note that we have over 860 residential contractors licensed. And we monitor those licenses on a monthly basis to make sure that they're still in good standing. So some of them may go off the list because of complaints or because of they don't have their bond paid or other issues that are going on. So that number can fluctuate. But that's a lot of contractors to keep track of on an annual basis. A lot of fence permits, a lot of sign permits through the zoning. So that gives you a little flavor for the variety of services that we provide and that we're involved with. So getting into the numbers of code enforcement, this is based on the annual report that you heard from Matt Tobias a while back. Just wanted to refresh your memory on the type of zoning or code enforcement cases, whether they're zoning, nuisance vegetation, sidewalk, snow removal, property maintenance. So again, our code enforcement team gets involved in a lot of different activities as well. So our operating budget for next year is proposed for planning building services of $6 million. And you can see that it's pretty stable in terms of those changes. Not much in terms of difference from the 2017 operating budget. And I'll just say that just under $2.5 million of that would be general fund. The rest of it would be other funding that comes from intergovernmental funding or permits, fees that we charge. The breakdown is pretty basic of personnel, no change, other operating, and then again to get that total. The basic increase, like you've heard from all the other departments, because of our wages and benefits. That's kind of our main change into 2018. We're looking at some reduction in part-time salaries. Going forward into 2018, when we move into the new building, there's going to be additional people between planning and building services, parks and recreation, and engineering that will be staffing that service counter. And so we think that we can create some efficiencies by having multiple departments providing those services that will allow us to reduce our part-time staffing needs. We're looking at some reduction in professional services. Some of our transportation funding is being shifted over to engineering next year. That can fluctuate from year to year. That's based on our work program, which is part of our MPO planning process that goes through the Southeastern Council of Governments. And then our increase in rental charges for fleet, all of our vehicles are under fleet management. And then our parking is going to be impacted next year when we move to the new building because we'll be using the 8th and Dakota ramp. And so that will result in some charges to the public parking system for our city vehicles. Our capital is pretty simple. The sculpture walk, the People's Choice Award, $30,000 that we purchase. We're replacing 3 pickups. And again, fleet management is the one that determines that replacement criteria. It's a combination of the vehicle age and mileage, and then a printer or copier. So, not much change in terms of our budget impact, but again, we're looking forward to moving into the new building next year, and I think it's going to continue to help us create some efficiencies for not only our operating budget, but also for our personnel that we have.
Okay, thank you, Director. Councilor Neitzer.
Director, have you determined if everybody in your department, planning and zoning, including the people that are at the counter downstairs, will move to the new building, or will you maintain a presence for walk-in permits at the original counter?
All the staff will be moving.
Okay.
Everybody, the current service counter that's in City Hall will be taken over by utility billing and public parking.
Okay.
So all of planning and building services will move to the new building.
Okay, and then when you made reference to the slide about 2 days from request for the inspections and for building permits being issued, I assume that's for, if I walk in and I have plans to build a house. Now, if I just walk in and I'm just getting a small permit, a little self, whatever do-it-yourself job, I'm assuming I can get that issued right there and right out the door, just as before.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. That's for a new home permit, is the 2 days.
All right.
All the other remodeling, those are still typically done at the service counter.
Okay. And it sounds like you're doing okay, but you have, it's just anecdotally looking at all of the buildings popping up, I wonder if your inspectors are running 100 miles an hour. You have enough inspectors to get all this done?
They are busy, but again, as I mentioned, with our intergov system, we're able to create more efficiencies by better managing those inspection locations each day and the timing of them.
Okay, so before it would be a little bit more, I don't know if the word would be piecemeal or kind of on the fly, where
or spontaneous, yes.
Spontaneous, okay. And I could see how that could make sense. Just as an analogy, back when I was on the Board of Adjustment, if we had 8 cases, I'd put it in my GPS in the trip planner, and it would plan it all out, and it would tell me, go here, go here, go here, go here, and it would, it'd figure out the shortest route to go to all these places versus zigzagging across town. Or even if you're inspectors, I know some of them have like their zone or
Yes,
district or whatever. That
Yep.
still is a lot of ground to cover, that you might be burning a lot of gas and a lot of time in a day.
So yes, that's exactly what we're working on now with the way that we schedule those inspections.
Okay, sounds like a good idea as long as the service level and the time is satisfactory for the customer, so thanks.
Okay, Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I don't have a question, but just hearing that something as simple as that creates an efficiency that will be then absorbed within the department just really makes me giddy almost, just knowing that, geez, why don't we do this earlier, you know, type thing. So I commend you for finding those efficiencies within your own department as we kind of, you know, tighten up a little bit. I know change is hard for some, but it just maybe takes a little bit of planning on the part of others as they need those inspections done. And it sounds like there's some flexibility there as well if there's a dire need for that. I'm also super excited about the EnviroGov, Intergov, thank you. And Intergov, getting the online building permit to where you can request those. I know that's been a long time coming, and I talk about it all the time. So I'm super excited for that as well, because I think that's helpful for a contractor to be able to just type in that number, request it, it gets scheduled, or they can check on the progress of it. And so that's helpful as well. So thank you for the presentation. I'll let you off the hook easy today. I don't have any questions for you, but thank you for your effort.
Well, you mentioned, asked us if we had had any feedback about this new policy, and Butch and I were both at the intergovernmental meeting that they had for the Home Builders Association. There was a lot of pushback on that. Butch can attest to that. Especially from the concrete profession.
Yes.
And they were inferring, and I think it would be good for all of us to hear their dialogue, because they were saying it's creating a hardship for them. And they're having to babysit this site for several hours while they're waiting for someone to come by. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at, because they were saying that it's costing them money, which is going to in turn be passed on to, at the end of the day, the home buyer. So I did hear that. And then the second thing I wanted to ask, I know we're talking about vehicles, and I think in today's society, a lot of people are hanging on to their vehicles longer, maybe into 120,000 miles, 130,000 miles. What is, and we're talking about trading these off at 100,000 within our city. I'm wanting to know, what's the most mileage that we allow a vehicle to have?
And I'll have to get that back to you, because fleet management is the one that has those metrics, and I can get that information to you.
But
because I think it varies by the type of vehicle.
Okay, but up to the dialogue today, I've just been hearing less than 100,000 or at 100,000. And I think if we put this out to our citizens, and if they're driving their vehicles to 120, 130, then I don't know why the city couldn't have the same philosophy.
Yeah, it's a combination of the age and mileage, but I'll get that requirement that fleet uses to help us with our inspection vehicles, because it is different than police and fire vehicles. But we'll follow up on that for you. And I would just say too, the meeting with the home builders was what, maybe a month ago, maybe less.
Yes.
And so we're saying, work with us on this new policy. It's a pilot, and if we need to change it in 90 days or 120 days, we'll look at that. So.
Well, and yeah, that's what I heard Butch saying, is that it was going to be kind of a trial thing.
Yes.
So yes, that's good.
So it was something new, and that was the reaction out of the chute. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rolfing.
Let's assume the pilot works. Makes sense to me in the long run, because I think, you know, anybody can adjust to say, instead of calling at 8 o'clock this morning, I had to call at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon to get on today's schedule. You know, that kind of thing, or 22 days, whatever they can run that, arrange that. But have you thought about, if this does work, of cross-training the inspectors so that they can do the engineering, the plumbing, and the electrical all in one shot without having to send the different one? Now, that may or may not work because of the training and what needs to be done, but I'm just saying, to me, that would make some sense, even if they could do just plumbing and electrical.
Yeah, each of these codes is very unique and very complex, and we've talked about that, and it does take a lot of training to understand each code on its own merit. So, yep.
Okay.
It would be like having the police and fire knowing the same thing. You
Right.
guys, yeah. But
Okay.
yeah, thank you for that comment.
The other thing that I wanted to just look at here was no increase in personnel costs. I'm assuming you figured into that some efficiency so that the cost of living and stuff can still be paid to yours, or have you instructed your whole department that nobody gets a raise, including you, next year?
Yeah, no. That's not up to me, but yes, we have found efficiencies to make up that
Okay.
gap for the cost of living increases for the staff next year.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
So that is in the budget.
Are there any other questions for Director Cooper? Well, Director Cooper, I would say that it's possibly better for you to be following police and fire versus them following you. That's usually not a good sign, but and I do agree wholeheartely. Our assistant clerk caught that one. I do agree wholeheartedly that what your department, your inspectors are doing is saving lives. It's called an ounce of prevention, especially when it comes to the structural and the electrical aspect. I mean, really all of it. I mean, the mechanical and the plumbing, they all have to draft properly and so forth. So you and your crew are providing a very important service. So thank you very much for your presentation, and we will now move on to the transit aspect of your department. And are you going to kick it off, or is Mr. Trebilcock
I'm just
going
going
to?
to kick it off real quickly, and
Very
Sam
good.
is going to come up.
Okay.
And again, I would just emphasize that the finance team has been working closely with us. I think we've spent more time scrutinizing this budget request and talking about the ongoing challenges of transit beyond 2018, as Sam will go through the slides with you today. The message that we want to continue to hammer with you and the public is that we continue to have some long-term challenges to make transit sustainable. And as Sam will show you, we've done some good things, but we haven't accomplished as much as we want to or as much as we're going to need to going forward beyond 2018, 2019. So it's kind of ironic that we're ending all the budget presentations with this one, but that's the way the schedule came together. So with that, I'll bring up Sam and he can go through the slides with you. Thank you.
Welcome, Sam.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Mike. Sam Trebilcock, City of Sioux Falls Planning Office. I'm the transportation planner with the city. Also with me this afternoon, three members of staff of Surrey Metro, Eric Meyerson, Robert Speaks, and Randy Hartman. They're sitting right over here. So they can certainly answer some questions as they come up through the presentation. As Mike mentioned, there's some things and challenges that we have in the future for transit. I want to start off with looking at what's most important in your mind right now, and that's 2018. We're looking at investing $8.2 million in transit. You can see some of the statistics over the last few years, last full years. 2014, 15, and 16 in terms of fixed route passengers, paratransit. And also we added a line this year we call CCTS passengers. That's Community Coordinated Transportation Services. They started providing agency trips, as we've talked about over the last few years. You can see it started out with a pilot project in 2015 where we just did a few starting kind of the latter part of the year. They did 9,100 last year. And then this year we project they'll be doing about 20,000 rides. You can see what kind of effect that's had on paratransit. We think that's significant. We think at the end of this year we should see a savings somewhere to the transit system about $340,000 doing it that way, because the system that is providing inefficiencies, and also we can make use of leveraging a grant. So we think it's certainly a win for us in that regard, and also the services are still being provided to the agencies at a very affordable, the same fare cost with limited additional costs to the agencies. Now, you can also look at the fixed route passengers. That has been coming down. And that's something we'll be relating to as we look in the future, too. There's a few reasons for that. First of all, some of the things that you'll see is since 2014, we've adjusted some services. We have made some cuts. That includes some school services and trolleys. That would be included in the ridership statistics. Also, something that we've seen since 2014 is gas prices have come down. The economy certainly has improved to some degree, and we've seen that effect also. But we also know that our transit system, as we continue to grow, we need to look at trying to expand that system, make improvements to that system. Otherwise, we think it really is becoming stagnant. The last time we made any increases in the transit system was in 2014. Before that was probably a decade before that. So we really are running the same system. As Eric keeps telling me, we're running a 1970s system in the 2000s, and that doesn't necessarily bode very well for us. Now, in 2018, we'll be looking at 8.6 million in SAM operating expenses. Other operating expenses is 0.3 million. Now, with the other operating, that is what we're pushing towards the agencies for CCTS rides. Next year, it'll be somewhere in the vicinity of 300,000. We're also looking at building repairs of 0.3 million, 300,000. Building repairs would be to look at something to do at the offices at Sioux Area Metro and their garage. It's highly needed. It's out of date. If you actually walk into the building, you'll see why. Meeting room facilities are highly inadequate. There's some updates that we could make, and we want to look at that. We want to see if we can even leverage that with a grant too. So we're going to be looking at that. Capital is very small this year. This is one of those years we're going to be building on our transit fund a little bit, or we hope to. So the total uses is 9.3 million. Now, one thing that we make use of as a part of this, when you look at in terms of the transit fund from what the city will be participating in, you have to look at the fares and advertising, which we would assume to be, or we're estimating to be, a little over $1 million will be coming into from fares and advertising. And so the city will be looking at about an $8.2 million contribution to the transit fund. Transit fund sources, really about 2/3, well, excuse me, 50, well, if you look at sales tax and general fund, about 2/3 of the transit system is being paid for by local taxpayers. 35% of it is coming from intergovernmental. This is mainly from the federal government. Most of that comes from an operating grant that we receive, about $2.7 million a year. We receive a little bit in capital funding, and then a very small amount from the state, about $62,000 from the state. So then for capital, we're looking at, as I mentioned earlier, a pretty small amount this year, a skid loader and a printer and coding machine. Printer and coding machine prints tickets, and we need another one of those machines to provide for our passes, for the transit passes. So we're just looking at $50,000 for next year. In future years, you'll see significantly higher capital costs, though. So one of the things that we're wanting to put down there, 2018 is certainly, we're looking good for next year. Everything is, the transit fund is in a healthy balance. We're certainly looking at to maintain a sustainability. We're still making efforts at our paratransit next year. We're looking at another 7,000 rides that we want to move to CCTS next year, which we think will look somewhere between 100 and 150,000 in savings for the transit system. So 2018 looks pretty good for the transit system. We're not looking at expansions, though. We're maintaining, we're sustaining what we have. Now, when we put this together, this this presentation, and by the way, finance and was on overtime for this presentation. We spent a lot of time on this. And the title of this is one of the things we spent quite a bit of time on. And we wanted to certainly make a point. The situation is becoming grim when we look into the future. That doesn't mean it's intractable, that it's impossible. That doesn't mean that there isn't things that we can do, and that's some of the things that we want to talk about that we need to look at. But what are some of the reasons that we see it as grim? First of all, federal funds are certainly questionable. We've already seen federal funds on capital have, through earmarks, have been cut. That has been a game changer from us from the beginning, and we've been playing catch up since then. Now, at the same time, federal funds have also been, we see estimates that we need to keep our federal funding estimates into the future at a lower percentage rate than we had estimated before. So that's something that's changed. Another thing is there's really little or no state funding available, and we don't see that there is in the future any more state funding available. Something we've been working quite a bit with the state on is coordination and talking to them, especially about those agency rides. And we've talked about that before, that a lot of those agency rides really are incorporated into a state funding formula right now that they're paying through Medicaid Choices waiver funding. They say that's already being paid. The agencies say it's not. So we're kind of caught in the middle. But that is something that we continue to work with the state on, and how we can coordinate. And we think we've come up with a pretty good system, a process through with coordinated the CCTS process that we're working through now. But again, with no more state funding available, it really makes it difficult to continue to cut into that, to the paratransit savings that we're looking for. Agencies can or won't contribute significantly at this point. We're looking at trying to start this year. That will be the first time we've seen, I think we'll see about $11,000 from both agencies, Lifescape and Dakota Abilities, which is something that we hadn't had before. We'd like to see more, but like I talked about with the state funding, that probably isn't anywhere near enough to get us to what we need. Fare revenues are flat. That's in part, we did have a fare increase a couple years ago, and that probably did help keep us at flat, because we've seen the amount of people that were our ridership come down. So that's just basically kept us at a flat level. And we don't see that changing real soon. Costs keep going up. We know that we're going to continue to see the inflationary increases regardless of what our revenue is doing, so we need to try to keep up, and that's certainly something that's an issue. The paratransit savings are less than that is needed, and that's kind of what I referred to earlier. We were looking at about, when we did the Transit Task Force report, somewhere between $1.3 and $1.6 million in savings. What we're probably projecting that we can get that makes sense, that's feasible, is about $830,000 by the year 2021. That's significant, and we think that's doable. But to do anything more than that, we think is going to be a really significant hardship on the agencies. We would be willing to look at something more than that, but I'm not sure in the end that that's going to significantly change the trend line that we have, and I'll show you here in a second. Now, the city can't go it alone either. We've talked about internally, and maybe this has even come up as we've talked before with questions from this body, that maybe we shouldn't take federal funds. Maybe that would give us additional flexibility. As we've looked at it, though, that's a $2.7 million hole, or probably more than that. Really, if we go back to it, it was about $3.5 million hole. The flexibility that you'd get in return for that probably isn't going to quite measure up. So we really have to think about that. We still have to try to figure out how to work within the money that we're getting. Fixed routes are stagnant, and because, in part of that, we think riderships are declining. We have a transit development plan that we just this body just adopted last year. We'd like to maintain that goal of expanding the routes, improving the routes, but in order to do that, we're probably going to need to see a game changer in this entire process. And a lot of that has to do with what I'm going to talk about in just a minute. We have done things up to this point, so I don't want to make it seem like we have done nothing, because we certainly have. We've transferred to the operation of the trolley services. We've eliminated the special services. Sometimes we'd give council and other boards tours through our system. Well, that would cause a significant amount of overtime. We eliminated our night demand services, which was through our paratransit services. We ended school services, including cutting 4 buses from our fixed route fleet. There's no new paratransit riders outside our federally required service area. We stopped doing that, so we shrunk in our required service area. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we've transitioned, and as of this year, we'll have transitioned 20,000 paratransit rides to CCTS, which will save us $340,000 a year. And we also did a small fare increase. It just really hasn't transitioned to the amount of money that we had expected because of the decreases that we're seeing in ridership. So what more can be done in the short term? We know we can shift some additional rides to CCTS. What we're planning to do by 2021 is to move an additional 30,000 rides to CCTS. By that point, that's when we will believe we'll see about $830,000 of savings to the system each year. That'll be significant, and we think that'll maintain us for a certain period of time. Agency fares are a possibility, and really that wouldn't be something that we'd see would be anything that the agencies would pay, but they would probably, instead of paying the agency fare, they would move to CCTS. To give you an idea, if we moved to the agency fare an additional $5, which would be $7.50, that would get us about $150,000 in revenue. What we're doing in moving 30,000 rides to CCTS, which would get all the agency rides essentially over, we could do that for about $60,000 a year for the agencies and still get more savings. So the model of going to CCTS is far superior. We have much more in savings in doing it that way. So the agency fares would just encourage the agencies to move to CCTS. But that's something we may really have to look at. Another thing is to not look at expansion to fixed routes at this point. What we're starting to see is that becomes problematic as we look farther out into the future. And then we could look at another fare increase, and that's one thing that we would be looking at fairly soon, maybe to increase our monthly rates, our monthly ride pass rates. So that's something we might want to look at fairly soon. I don't think that's going to give us significant amounts of funding, but it certainly will look at providing some increases. So this is certainly not a sustainable plan. And some of the reasons for that I've been through a little bit already, but when we first did the transit fund forecast back in 2014, the transit fund was out of money in 2020. So we have made significant strides. The Transit Task Force helped create a positive transit fund, including an expansion to the transit, the fixed route system, to go, and that went out through 2026. And you can kind of see we've gone a little bit further. We're out to 2028 that we're starting to look at now. And you can see the trend continues to go down. So you're going to say, well, what has changed? First of all, our general fund contribution changes. We were at 4% when we first started doing this. We're now at 2% increases, in part because of some of the revenue changes that finance is seeing. 2, federal operating and capital As I mentioned earlier, we've kept that at 0% increases. Instead, before we had it at 2% increases. Also, we're not seeing quite as much paratransit savings. We're seeing $830,000 in this model here, in this fund forecast, whereas before we were at about $1.3 million. And then also, fares are not jittering as much. We were looking at about $230,000 additional per year. We're getting pretty much flat. So that doesn't, I think we might be looking at it a little bit more as we get further out. We're hoping to get maybe 100,000. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, this only went out to 2026. Now, one of the things that we're noticing that really creates problems throughout this entire transit fund forecast is what started this entire thing, and that's the lack of capital funding that we're getting. And we're essentially, one time when before earmarks were taken away, we were getting about what I would consider about $1 million a year. Now we're getting about 200,000. So we were able to fund our capital about 80%. Now, we're not the only transit system in the country that this is becoming a problem. I'm hearing this more and more. This is becoming a significant issue. And that's why I say we need a game changer. What we've been trying to do up to this point is improve the game, and we've done that, but we do not have a game changer here. So we are needing to look at what can change the game for us to do something by 2026. So some of our long-term options might be look at a transit authority, such as a dedicated tax district. Now, to do that, we would have to go to the legislature for authorization to do that. But other states and other transit systems are a transit authority. They're actually their own system. So you actually would devolve it to a transit authority. It wouldn't be part of the city anymore in any way, shape, or form. Another thing you could do is reduce or eliminate the transit system. I don't like that last one. I don't think anybody does at all. I don't like the reducing it either, but that would be something that you would be faced with unless you could change the game. A substantial increase in city contributions, that could also be a game changer, but that's not necessarily something that I can speak to how you could do that. A large fare increase to support actual cost of trips. That sounds like that might make sense, except I don't know that you would have a lot of people riding, especially the market that we have for transit. Just as you can imagine, going through the small increases that we did a couple of years ago and then coming back and saying, well, let's quadruple that. That's not probably very likely. Some other things you could look at, other places are starting to look at what you could do with Uber-type models or taxis or other things that are more private-public partnerships. Those are things that are probably starting to be done out there. Other communities are doing Uber-type models on first mile, last mile, but not really within the core of the transit system. But that is something to be considered. With that, I would take in your questions.
Okay, I'll open it up to council. Councilor Rolfing.
Thank you, Sam. We've worked pretty close on some of this throughout the last 6.5, 7 years I've been on council, and it's a problem we've got to face. We have another one, I think, too, and that's when, in about 4 years, when we reach 200,000 population. Some things change at that point. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, when you change it to 200,000, the operating support that I talked about, that 2.7 million, that would go away. Now, that doesn't mean federal funding goes away, though. Federal Transit would start providing a capital assistance at a higher level. And typically, I've seen that still it's pretty about commensurate with what your population is, but it's a good point that, we do have to deal with the changes that would bring forward. But hopefully, I would think that would come as part of the census and what we're projecting right now, I think. And then I'm going to look over at Mike. I think that would be 2030 before we hit census. So we might actually get to keep our operating support through 2030. But
if we had $5,000 or 5,000 population for the next 4 years, 17, 18, 19, 20. And the counting is done, the census is done in 21. We're going to be at 200,000. I'm just projecting, pretty simple math on my part. So it might be something. So tell me then, why in 2022 the chart starts going up again on the sustainable plan, the line?
This is all based on how we're buying our buses. We're buying buses out of the transit fund. And essentially what we did is there was an injection of $750,000 each year in sales tax money that just went into the transit fund. And that's being kept stable throughout this plan period. But when we're buying a lot of buses, you're seeing the transit fund surplus helping to buy some of that capital, some of those replacement vehicles. When in 2022, you see it coming back up, we're building back up the funds so that we can
start purchasing
more.
Okay.
And what you see happening in 2026, we've been calling it, I think we've been calling it the bus bubble, kind of the bus bubble. We have a lot of buses in 2026 that we're having to replace about that time. 2025, 2026, you can kind of see where we're starting to head back down and go. But yeah, that's how that works.
One more?
Yes.
Just a wild thought. Are there any for-profit bus transit systems that are operating in the United States that you know of?
I don't know of any public cities and any city systems. Or do you know any?
I'm just thinking, there's very little way to make money on this.
And you might remember I did a transit, history of transit last year. I think it was last year. And they used to be all private before the mid-'70s. But it became more and more difficult to do it in large part because more and more people were taking their vehicles or, it just was becoming more and more expensive. So all those systems were closing. And that's what happened in 1979 here when our private system closed down. So that's where the cities have taken that over.
Just a thought.
Okay, Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Sam. Appreciate your report. It's always, I think it was last year as well. So I'm going to poke the bear. What happens if we shut this down? What happens to, first of all, it saves us almost $6 million out of the operating fund for the city. We could use that. But what happens if we shut it down?
Well, I think what you have to say for sure is that people that do rely on it will not have a ride.
And how many people is that? Do we know? We know how many rides we have in a year. Do we know how many people take the bus?
No, I don't know that and that's something we could estimate for you if it's, an exact number of people. I know we would know how many paratransit riders we have, but we wouldn't know, we haven't probably estimated how many fixed route riders we have on an average. But those people, they would not have as an easy way to get around. Certainly, I think we're also trying to push the envelope to try to have this, as we are a growing city, to become more sustainable, that people are able to utilize it as congestion increases in our city. So I think down the line, you potentially hurt your growth, because now people say you don't have a transit system and all you have is the single occupant vehicle to get around. I'm going to go somewhere else like Portland or New York City or Chicago or Minneapolis that I can get around as an option. So I think that's a worry. But
if I might, Mr. Chair, just continue a little bit farther down this road. Don't hear me saying we need to close the bus system down. But I want the public to understand that that is an option at this point.
yes.
And yes, the results would be dire. It makes us look bad as a community. It doesn't make us attractive to, especially those younger workers that we're looking so desperately to bring in. But it also then creates an issue where we're going to lose, you know, not only a system of jobs that are already there, but a system of future jobs. And so it's a big deal. So the other side of the coin then, Sam, is that we continue to be one of the lowest of our neighboring communities. If you look at Omaha, Minneapolis, even Rapid City, we're the lowest, or at the very bottom of, very close to the bottom of the list of fares. And we fight it every year for a jillion reasons. And I've been there too. I'm not necessarily voting for fare increases when I probably should have, but talk about that idea of a combination of fare increases, and can you kind of in a nutshell tell us what a transit authority might look like? How would that work?
Well, the transit authority would be essentially an independent body. They have one in Des Moines that's independent. I'm sure there's others too close by.
The airport
is
authority,
like
right?
that. Yeah, it's very similar to the airport. But in this case, you would have its own dedicated taxing authority. And they would also be the recipients of federal funding. So they would be able to recapture that. And then they would charge their own fares. I mean, so there would be their own system. They would have their own governing body. That's what other transit systems do. And it kind of takes it out of the city realm. It also can become, and a lot of places do it when they're becoming more regional, and they're looking to go outside of just the city. So I think that's another option as you're continuing to look at that too.
I just think, just for a matter of conversation, this is something we have tried to be serious about it before, and we get a handful of folks that come to us and say, no, we can't do that. We have to get serious as a community, because I'm right there. I'm ready to say close it down. I really am, because it doesn't make sense for us as a city to continue to have these dire forecasts, but it also would be shooting ourselves in the foot. I fully acknowledge that, but I think we have to be serious about this conversation.
And I'm going to make one other point to emphasize, and I said this before. The capital funding is a big deal. It just has totally changed the game for transit systems. There's a lot of transit systems that I'm going to tell you now are going to have problems just like we're projecting now. It isn't just going to be Sioux Falls. And I'm hearing that now. And that's in large part because when the financial models were put together, they said, okay, we're pretty much counting on the federal government to fund our capital because they're doing 80% of it. That's how it works. And when all of a sudden it changed and they said, oh, by the way, we're going to do 20% now, you can get your savings, you can cut here and cut there for a while. But you're seeing after a while, once we're done with the cuts, we're going underneath again because we just can't keep doing it. And I think that's what other communities are starting. I'm hearing that from Rapid City. I'm hearing it from First Transit, that they're seeing that with other communities. It's a big deal, even if you're a transit authority.
Okay, Councilor Neitzer. Yes.
Good? Okay, just to make sure I'm not jumping the line.
No.
Yeah, something I wrote down 2 words here, and it was death spiral. And you got to figure out how to get out of that. So looking at your 2014, 15, 16 fixed route ridership numbers, each of them shows about an 80,000 rided decrease each year. Has that trend been consistent years past, or is this new?
No, we were increasing really up till about 2011, 12, when we went above 1 million, just fixed route riders. And a large part of that, if you remember, our gas prices during that time leading up to that were, $4 or $5. So a lot of people were taking transit because of that, because it was an affordability issue. But all of this, again, I'll emphasize, school, there's about 50,000 rides just in school services there that we've taken out of the trolley was a part of that. Some of that is attributed to that also.
Okay, so there's multiple moving parts. It's not that ridership is necessarily just dropping off consistently for one particular reason. It's hard to...
And I think we're seeing looking over here, we're seeing fairly stable ridership this year. Some routes are even increasing again. So we're hoping that we're seeing a turnaround to some degree, but you know, to get the increases that we're looking for, we think we're going to have to invest more into the system, really.
Okay, and I have all these different notes. I'm just looking to see what. So I guess as I've thought about it, I've just been kind of going in circles because it seems to me when I think about it, really a couple of the major issues are the bus doesn't go everywhere I would need it to go. It doesn't go near my house. It takes too long to get somewhere. So, I mean, so in theory, if we added a bunch of buses and a bunch of routes and all this stuff, maybe you gain new customers, but we go all in and multiply millions and millions of dollars of the subsidy to try to make it a system that's attractive. That's not going to work. So, I mean, it's sort of a chicken or the egg thing that how do you get out of this mess?
Right. I mean, again, you're just looking at the transit fund forecast. This is with no route expansion at all. So it gets even worse what we need to do is invest another $1 million into the transit system to be doing what you're just talking about, which is provide, better rides at less time in more places that people live to be able to get that ridership to come back up and more utilization. But we need a game changer to make that happen.
And last thing, if there's a transit authority, I assume that this would be something like the legislature would have to create the ability to do that, and then it'd be something that'd be on my property tax, presumably. Everybody in a county might pay something to this line item, and that's how they fund the transit system?
It could be that way. It could be sales tax, could be other things, whatever, you'd have to look at as part of that authorization, but yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Councilor Erickson?
Thank you. Sam, I've got a handful of questions here. Remind me the state obligation for public transit. What is our state obligation? Are we required as a municipality to have a public transit system?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Nothing says that we have to do it or within X amount of bus stops. What's the standard that you use right now for your new route and route expansion?
Well, a route expansion, we just looked at, and Eric Meyerson really put it together. He was looking, there wasn't any specific standards. We were just looking at where could we get the best utilization of funds to be able to provide to our system. So we looked at a few expansions, we looked at a few improvements to routes, but then as a part of the paratransit system, you have to ensure that you provide service on any of those routes within 3/4 of a mile.
So there is that standard for paratransit, but not the traditional.
Yeah, and that's a federal requirement. It's an ADA requirement that we have to match. For
right.
Anytime you have a fixed route system, you have to have something that's parallel to that fixed route, which is paratransit.
Right, so we do have the regulations that we have to have paratransit,
yes,
which in turn really says we have to have a transit system or really redo the transit system as a whole. Wouldn't that be fair?
Well, it would mean we would have to have paratransit if we had a fixed route system and took the federal money, yes.
Right, that's what I'm saying. And so
yes,
we do have an obligation to have the paratransit and that. So my question also is, as we've talked about all these different doomsday things of ridership is down. What are we doing to increase ridership?
Well, one of the things that we looked at with the transit development plan, of course, right up front was looking to improve the system, which we think would enhance ridership significantly. But the other things that we look at is travel training. We look at other things that we'll be looking at in the future. And travel training would be like getting people to understand how to use the system. That's why we did Google Transit. So people have another avenue to figure out how to ride the bus. Some of the other things that we're looking at in the future is like mobile ticketing, so that you have perhaps your cell phone. You could just get on your cell phone and you could have an app and you could buy a ticket and you could just show it to the driver and get on. That's something we're looking at seriously doing here in the future. So we think that would be a benefit, and maybe especially millennials or others would look at that as a benefit. But it does become a problem, even if they are able to do that. Then they start saying, well, where can I go? And it's limited. So, but that's some examples of what we're working towards.
Okay, so I have a couple more. The task force that was done, what changes are left to be implemented? Are there any changes that were on the table that we didn't implement for whatever reason? I know the fair fees were part of that conversation, but other than just increasing fees, what other efficiencies or things did we need to do with that task force?
I'll quickly read the agency work trip reductions, 1.6 million impact per year. We're going to be about half of that, so we're not getting all the way there.
Okay.
To be able to do that, though, to get that 1.6 million, we would have to charge, the agency's contributions would be about $500,000 to get there through CCTS. Right now, they're paying $11,000. Last year, they paid $0. So we're going up to $500,000 to get there. So that's the issue, and we continue to work with the state to get there. How are you going to do that? I mean, it's just, so that's the quandary we're in there. Increase the general fund to 4% increase per year. Like I said before, we're at 2% because of changes in revenue. Align the paratransit service area with the ADA area. We did that. Discontinuing school tripper services. We did that. Fare increases. We did that, but we're not getting the revenue that we thought. And we also did something with Project CAR. Those are the 7 things that we looked at. And as I mentioned before, we didn't look out beyond 2026. We looked out that far, and we thought, what's going to happen after that? Well, as we continue to look further, the capital issue is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. It continues to be something that makes it difficult to keep our transit fund balance above 0 as we look out beyond 2026.
Can I keep going? I have a couple more. Sorry, I waited to make sure everybody had their chance. A question.
Let's go ahead with one more, and we can always come back.
Yep, paratransit system. This was something that was brought to my attention years ago. I think when I first got elected over 3 years ago, was to have some sort of dispatch system that create these efficiencies, much like Director Cooper has done with the building permit of creating these, here's where I'm going to go, and making sure that if I need to pick you up and you up and you up, I'm doing it in the best way possible to making sure I'm not picking you up, dropping you off, then coming back and and zigzagging around town. And I'm not sure if that's been done. I don't believe so, but I know that particular efficiency has been brought up many times, and I don't know what it would take to do something like that.
We just purchased new paratransit software, dispatching, and basically scheduling software. So we're hoping we see efficiencies there through route match. In terms of what we're doing with the fixed route system, it's fixed. So anything that we would change with that, we did as part of the transit development plan to identify where we could see efficiencies to be able to serve the people that you're looking at. And we think we've done that.
But
it doesn't come
specifically
without
with
cost.
paratransit, I mean,
Yeah.
the comment was made to me, and this person has a family member that uses paratransit very, very frequently, to where I see him sitting there for an hour and a half with the bus riding, waiting for my sister to come out, and just the inefficiency of something like that. I don't know.
Paratransit itself is a shared ride service. So the weights that they might have, typically, we find that there's a number of reasons for it, but a lot of times it's, if you want to look at specifically that's something we could have a separate issue, a separate discussion on, because each one of those situations there's probably a reason for.
Right.
And our paratransit manager and others from Surrey Metro could speak to some of those specific issues, because each time we looked at those things, we said, okay, that's because of this happened this day, or this happened because of that day. But there are, because we're becoming a growing community, some of the rides take longer to get out there to the outer reaches of our service area, so.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Staley.
Sam, I remember last year we were having this conversation about the state funds for the agency rides, and that there was state money, but we couldn't get a hold of it, and other municipalities are getting it, and we can't. So why can't we get some assertive negotiator involved and make this connection happen?
The conversation goes a little bit like this. You go to this state, and the state says it's in the formula, it's there. The cost of transportation is there. And then you go to the agencies, and they say, no, it's not. And so then you go back and you say, well, who's going to pay for it? And both of them point at each other.
Right. So, I mean, as a city councilor, can I go and help out with that?
What I generally get from each of the, whether it's the state agency, it's basically just not in the budget to increase any, it's just not there. Just like it's probably not in our budget. And you go to the agencies and they say the same thing. It's just not in our budget. It's just not there. So.
But is it supposed to be? Is there a formula that says Sioux Falls is entitled to percentages as are other municipalities?
You could make an argument that says that we could charge an agency fare that would be closer to the fully allocated rate, which would be somewhere right now is $30 a ride. Mm-hmm. What that would be negotiated with the agency, and you could say, okay, we're going to charge you $18 a ride, agency. And they would go, okay, that's possible, but I think what's going to happen is you're likely going to see rationing services from these agencies because at least what they tell me is that they don't have the funding for that. I guess I'm taking their word on it a little bit.
Okay, exactly. So I want to make sure we're just exhausting every avenue possible. I think this is one place we could look into. I'm happy to work with you on that. Okay, another question I had, you talked about ending school service for the 4 buses. Now, did the school district pay money for that?
Before?
Yeah, you said that that's what,
No.
what's been done to help.
That was a service that was provided to, basically we were providing school services. We had a specific route that was laid out. It was for anybody that wanted to ride it, but typically the people that rode it were people going to school, to the high school. We were using some of the older buses in our fleet, but still those buses had to be replaced eventually. So it was a capital cost.
But you were getting reimbursed by the school for that? Oh, okay, so that was, okay.
So now the schools are doing that service.
Okay, could you have been reimbursed by the school?
I think we talked about that when we were negotiating with the schools, and they thought it was going to be better for them to do it through School Bus Inc., like they do the rest of their services.
Okay, then 2 more things. That taxing authority, now you talked about that being sales tax. Are you saying that we would add an extra percentage of sales tax collected? Because that sounds a little vague as to what our options would be.
Yeah, I don't think we've done enough looking into how that would work and what other places have done to make, the dedicated tax work. I think a lot of transit authorities probably use property taxes, maybe I don't know. But that's something we'd have to look at.
And my last question is, okay, politically, forget any ramifications for yourself here, but if you could say, this is my wish list for solving this problem, you personally, what would you tell us to do? What would you like to do?
Well, yeah, that's a loaded question.
That's what
well, I think the things that we have to look at are 1 or 2 things, at least from my perspective, because I think the service is worth it. One of the things is the transit authority, or, is there some way that, that either the city or the federal government or combinations of the 2 can look at increasing their contributions. But those are not something that's within the control of transit, so. But the transit authority might be, I don't
The
know.
transit, and that, so that would just be Sioux Falls going forth and,
The issue is you got to get state buy-in to it, so.
Okay, before I go back to Councilors Rolfing and Erickson, Councilor Starr or Selberg, did you want to weigh in on anything? Okay, and Councilor Erickson has waived, so Councilor Rolfing, you had something else you wanted to add?
I just wanted to state that former Councilor Jameson is in the audience, and he was my co-chair on the Transit Task Force, and that those goals and ambitions, if you will, that we came up with were important. But this is something that we do have to face. I'm sorry to say it's going to be some of you. It's not going to be me. But as Councilor Beck said, this is so important. We've got to have a transit system in Sioux Falls, and as we get growing bigger and bigger, we're going to have to either put more money into it or cut it back or whatever. And we've got to come up with a solution on here. And so I'm going to encourage you to keep going with this and make sure that we do have that transit system. I think one of the big things that's really helped is the River City or CCTS. Yes, CCTS, which has really made a big difference. And if they can pick up 30,000 more rice next year, that's going to make a huge difference. But we still, in the projections, and thank goodness we got people who can look outside the box and project out this far to let us know we got a problem. We can deal with it now over years, over the next 8 years. 8-9 years, rather than having it come to us in 2026, and we gotta really make some drastic changes. And then the last thing I wanted to know is for Councilor Jameson. He wanted to know if you could define this. The grid system, which he is a fan of. He's a big fan of. Councilor Erpenbach knew what I meant right away. And he says that he still seems to think that that's going to work the best, even though it's been studied twice and found that it probably wouldn't be. So, but thank you, Councilor.
Okay, thank you, Sam. I mean, this is a difficult issue to resolve, and I know that we've been working on it for a long time. And it seems to me that of the long-term options that you've listed here, you could go really a combination of ways here. One, pursue the transit authority, but we would have to get that through the legislature before we would even have that option available to us as a city to consider it. And then the other two would be a substantial increase in city contributions, possibly combined with fare increases. I don't know that there's any of us that really want to see option two, the reduction or elimination of the transit system. So we do have our work ahead of us yet. So, but thank you very much for the report, Sam. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So that's the last item on our agenda today. So just to remind you that next week, August 22nd at 5 p.m., we have joint budget hearings with Minnehaha County, and the items that will be discussed then are the Siouxland Libraries, Metro Communications, and the Siouxland Heritage Museums. Lincoln County has canceled their meeting, so that's off, and it appears that the 4 o'clock informational will also be canceled as well due to a lack of any submissions for the informational session. So the only thing on our agenda next Tuesday afternoon would be the 5 p.m. joint budget hearing between City of Sioux Falls and Minnehaha County. All right, this meeting is adjourned.